Hello, everybody. Welcome to TEDx preview event on recording. I am Caleb Duarte. I am joined all the way across the world in India. Vip, how are you doing this morning for you as it's 10 a.m. where you're from?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Visiting family in India. Glad to join.
Nice. Well, Vip, we're just going to jump right into it. You're in India. I'm in Arizona. Big difference. What you just got there, first time in 5 years, actually. What's the biggest, I would say, difference in terms of just living your life in India?
Yeah, I would say the biggest difference out here is definitely transit. I'm sure you guys have seen some pictures. When it comes to public transport, there's buses and trains, and they're crammed full of people, and it's shoving a fare just to get in. And even if you're not using public transport and you're just in a car or motorbike, nobody really follows traffic laws. So you've got people driving on the wrong side of the road. You've got hatchbacks in the mountains, remote places where people are passing where they really shouldn't be, and it's a pretty frightful affair, but it's always fun.
Well, it's definitely not like that, but Arizona sometimes does feel a little hazardous, if I say so myself. Well, Vip, I also want to ask then, so I visited New Delhi, India, a senior in high school. It was totally culture shock for me. I saw the driving, I saw the different stuff. What's the difference kind of you're 21 years of age, you're a scientist. What's it like going into science in India versus being a scientist in America? Is there a difference, or is it just science is science?
I think that some of the vocational programs here start a lot earlier. I'm not particularly familiar with how the education system here has changed in the last couple of years, but really people who go into science and engineering here set their sort of track as early as 11th grade.
Oh, wow.
And, it's very highly competitive, test-based. They have their own sort of high-tier universities, just like we've got MIT here, there's IIT. So there's certainly a lot of similarities, but science and engineering here tends to be a lot more rigorous at the early stages.
So were you born in India or were you born in the States?
I was born in India, but I moved to the States when I was like 3 months old. So
Okay.
I grew up in the States for the majority of my life. I used to fly back here every 2 years and visit family. But after graduating and getting into the real world, it took a while to get back.
Do you ever feel when you come back, you said you come back every 2 years, did you ever feel pressure to kind of come back and develop your talent in India and the country you're born in, or do you kind of feel like you were where you're supposed to be in the States?
I've always been a fan of traveling, so I enjoy being in India. I had a stint in Europe where I actually met with a lot of science communicators, which got me into the field itself. But I think that the U.S. has always been the right space for me.
Well, that's cool. Europe, which part of Europe?
A lot of Western Europe. Spent a lot of time in Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, that area.
Well, Vip, I want to jump into, we kind of know a little bit about you now. 21, you're from India, you've been in the States all your life, almost all your life. Who is Vip as the professional? Tell us, who is Vip when they see it on a resume?
Yeah, so I actually graduated from the University of Arizona with a degree in molecular and cellular biology. So my professional experience, or at least educational experience, is in science, but I've spent my last 3 or so years as a career professional consulting mainly in creative and communications in digital. So I consider myself a digital storyteller. And one of my first ventures is what really inspired me to look into science communication and getting the message out about more technical topics. And it's called Draw Science, and it was my first company that I'd ever founded. And we worked with a lot of different academic publishers, scientific organizations, and even individual scientists, and just took really, really technical research and presented it in an engaging and interesting format.
So Draw Science, what would you say is the root behind that creation?
So I used to be a science fair nut back in high school, and I think I did science fair for about 7 or 8 years straight at every different level, local, national, even went to the international ISEF sponsored by Intel.
Oh, wow.
And so I had a lot of fun when I was doing that, but I think my biggest strength at those science fairs and the reason I was able to win certain awards was actually not necessarily the caliber of the research I was doing, although I'm very thankful to some of the people at ASU Biodesign and other institutes where I had the opportunity to work. But it was really the presentation. I used to put together these really intricate graphic designs for my posters, and they always caught the eyes of judges. And so there's this one judge at Intel ISF the final year when I went. His name is Winston Vuong. He's a PhD, does a lot of research still pretty involved in science communication. And he came up to me and said, this concept is really interesting. You should think about starting a blog and doing it for academic research and just putting it out there. And that blog really took off. I started my senior year of high school, and it went on to, we had a Cell Press feature some of our stuff. Business Insider Science Editor came in and syndicated the blog. A lot of people picked up on it, and after that is when I started getting real contracts, and it changed from being just a high school kids blog to this crowdfunded open access journal and a real business.
Well, that's actually interesting you say that, because I mean, like I mentioned earlier, you're only 21. You could attend GCU as a college student. A lot of these people that are here in the audience today are actually your age, if not a few years off, either older or younger. And you said that you kind of got your start because you just put it out there. You had the confidence in yourself to just put a blog. And like you even said, if this high school blog developed and just blew up, if you could say something to the people that are listening today that maybe they need that pushover to just trust themselves, what could you say to them that to just inspire them, if anything, to take that jump of faith?
Yeah, I think that the biggest fear, and I personally face this every time I've jumped into a new idea, is that when you risk your personal brand on this new idea that nobody's really thought of, the fear of failure and the fear of sort of embarrassing yourself is what holds a lot of people back from at least trying these new ideas. And you'll be shocked by how many people will brace you and support you. And that sort of support, the reward that you get from the proponents of your ideas, is so much more than the small percentage of people who are going to be against it or consider it boring or not innovative or even harmful. And even with Draw Science, there were at the very start definitely some parties that were not a fan of the idea, that do not like taking really complex scientific topics and simplifying it so much that a layperson can digest it. They think it's pointless, or they think that it's overly childish. But ultimately, it was the supporters and the people who saw the ultimate value of bridging the scientific academic community and the lay people who read science news that made this idea grow into what it could be.
Well, Vip, you kind of been talking about how you got started with the whole blog and all that, and this brand that you've been able to develop rather quickly and in a short matter of time compared to what other scientists may take years and years to develop. Science disconnect. You kind of talked about for high school students or students in college that maybe have fear of putting their personal brand on the line. Your personal brand that you've kind of developed through, what you're going to talk about on February 22nd, being the science disconnect that over the years has developed. What made you feel inspired to kind of talk about that with your background in science? You've talked about it in these past few moments. What kind of inspired you to be able, with your background in science, to talk about this whole disconnection that science, the community of science, has?
Yeah, when I initially was working in labs and putting out this academic level research, I was really young, and I wasn't the only one doing it. A lot of these kids who are in science fairs are putting out academic level research, working under principal investigators at really high profile labs at universities and private research institutions across the US and the world. And the thing I realized is, unless you have PhD affixed after your name, it's really, really hard to get your ideas or whatever you've discovered out to either the scientific community or even just the broader research community that's interested in what the latest science news is. And there aren't very many platforms to do that. And that's sort of what got me involved in putting out this blog and getting involved in science communication, broadly speaking. From there, I sort of branched out. I started moving into more just digital storytelling and more broadly figuring out how to communicate ideas online in an engaging and interesting format. But the core issue that I've always stuck to is using data and my background in science to empower a sort of approach to communicating ideas that are usually technically complex or hard to understand in a manner that somebody really wants to read or engage with.
How do you feel that has kind of blown up, if you say. I mean, kind of like our age of people, we kind of, we want it right out of our hands right away. And even just 10, 15 years ago, you had to go to a textbook, you had to look it up, you had to learn about this. But kind of right now with our generation, everything's at our fingertips because we have a phone. Do you think that has kind of helped maybe bridge the gap into the science disconnect, where people, maybe they know this, they answered this really deep question that 15 years ago only a certain percentage of scientists could hold?
Totally, yeah. I think that one of the key reasons that this sort of visual medium for communicating complex topics has succeeded, and like you mentioned, timing is very important with many of these ideas around media and communication. The key reason that this whole thing blew up and it was successful is that everyone wants information at their fingertips. Microsoft did a study about a decade ago, I think it's 2 decades now actually, where they said that the average human attention span was 12 seconds. Well, now it's dropped to under 8 seconds,
Wow.
which is less than that of a goldfish. And so you have a very short amount of time to catch someone's attention. And especially because we're digesting most of our content on Facebook or some sort of social feed, you have to stand out in how these topics are presented. And when it comes to something that's as esoteric and boring as science, not to offend any of the scientists out there, you have to find a way to make it interesting to the broader audiences. And so that challenge is what really got me into the space. And I think being able to solve that challenge is what made Draw Science and this idea of bridging the science disconnect work out.
Man, less than a goldfish, people. We have a problem. Well, Vip, it has been so great talking to you about just your world. And honestly, this is barely even touching the surface about what we can learn from you on February 22nd. One last thing, in February 22nd, in just over a month, we're going to hear your whole TED Talk. Why should people come and just a little bit of tease, what can they expect from you, Vip?
Well, what I'm really hoping is that when people come over on February 22nd, that they can learn a little bit more about why science is interesting. I hope to give you a reason to read a little bit more science news. And for those of you who are in the fields of science and research, a new way of looking at communicating the latest and greatest and breaking and cutting edge science, from artificial intelligence to cybersecurity to space travel, all those cool topics that we think are sci-fi and are much closer than we expect.
Well, I can guarantee you when you talk, we'll have an attention span more than a goldfish. That is a promise, and I can't wait to see it. This has been a talk with Vip, founder of Draw Science, and you can hear Vip talk February 22nd at TEDx, Grand Canyon University. It's been great talking to you. Thank you so much, Vip. Enjoy your time in India.